47-ish stuff at the end of the day.
How long do they watch?
I don't know, it just says views. Just some of our neighbors are watching.
Yesterday was a long day. We finished off capital and started on operating. We left off at the end of the Public Works operating budget. And do you guys have any questions or burning things that you want to bring up now that before we get into the rest of the presentation?
Okay, that one, right? 229 is when we'll be starting today.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. No, just, we were talking about that one road yesterday when we ended up, and I don't think we made any decision on that or anything like that, correct?
No, it's in the parking lot. So we
Okay.
have an undertaking to bring back the maintenance data. The numbers that we've got so far are quite staggering. They're even beyond what I estimated they were for maintenance on that road. But I need a chance to review them thoroughly. I just got them this morning, so we want to make sure they're accurate. So hopefully early this afternoon we'll have an answer to you on what those maintenance costs were in 17 and 18 on that stretch of road.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
Okay, so if you're on page 229, you can look at the technical services operating budget. So if you look at line R1 grants, we do have an increase from last year of grants due to some operating projects as listed below. I'll get to those, but so we're looking at 89,200 for grants. Our sales of goods and services is projected at 9,000. It's a decrease from last year. That's basically based on map sales through GIS and my inspection fees. My inspections weren't as frequent this year, so I wasn't able to collect as much revenue there. So we're looking at about $9,000 for next year. E1 salaries, wages, and benefits, there is an increase there. That's mainly due to COLA, and as Jen alluded to yesterday, splitting up Rick's salary within my department. It wasn't in there before, so that's the increase there. E2 is basically the same as well as E3. E4, we've got some operating projects, as I mentioned. I'll get to them below. And services by other department increased as well. Again, alluded to yesterday with IT rates going up. So if we look at the bottom, we've got, like I said, 2 operating projects, asset management phase 2 for 2019 and facilities assessment for asset management. And then in 2020, we've got asset management phase 3. So I'll just give you some bit of detail on those projects. Asset management phase 2 is a continuation of phase 1. This will include further training on asset management for staff, developing risk and life cycle modeling, levels of service, critical activities path, and other things as well. That level of servicing is really where council is going to be involved. That level of service is determined by council. So I expect next year we may have a workshop to get council involved and determining some levels of service to kind of guide us in the right direction.
We've been getting a lot of data from FCM lately on asset management, and I know this morning I just got a survey for CAOs, so I'm not sure if you've had time to look at all of that or some of that, because I'm just wondering if there's possibly going to be any more funding through that FCM program.
So as far as I know, that grant that we were successful for phase 1, we got $50,000. It was supposed to be a 3-year program with $50,000 for 3 years. We were going to use that for the 3 years for a total of $150,000. That program was fully subscribed already, and they've canceled that funding after the first phase. So we did get it for phase 1, but phase 2 and 3, it's not looking like right now that there's any funding available.
I guess we'll have to see what's rolling out, because it seems like all of a sudden FCM is talking about asset management quite heavily. We're getting a lot of information from them.
Hopefully, yeah, they come up with another funding program.
Okay, thanks, Deb.
So just a question, how many people are in your budget? Like, we used to have a little thing at the top of the page saying there was 2 staff, 2.5, whatever that is. How many people are,
We have to flip back to page 227, so I've got 4.15 full-time equivalent positions. Includes Rick's as well.
okay, I see it now.
A slice of me, like one of my arms and a couple of toes.
And can you get it all back together, or is it just kind
How many departments are you divided into?
Five.
Five, okay. Five, yeah. And different percentage for, depending on your workload,
Yeah,
yeah.
the majority is public works.
Okay, thank you.
So the next operating project, facilities assessment for asset management. So obviously it includes a facility assessment for all of the county's facilities. We want to get a high level of understanding of the components of the building. This building, for example, let's say our HVAC system, when was it installed? What kind of maintenance do we have to do on it to keep it running to its optimal life cycle, and when does it require replacement? Things like that need to be looked at. Electrical systems, plumbing, roofing, structural, all those things. We want to look at, get that data, and put it into the asset management software so we can properly budget and be prepared for upgrades or renewals when they're required.
Was that the kind of point yesterday for the up and down of temperature?
That's a very contentious issue in this building.
Yeah, it always has been.
Yeah. Everybody's got a fan and a space heater in our office. Used sometimes at the same time.
Well, I thought I was having menopause.
And then for 2020, we've got our final phase for asset management, phase 3. This will include further asset management training, completing the development of risk and life cycle modeling, levels of service, which I mentioned before, council's gonna have some heavy involvement in, and critical path activities. This phase will complete our 3-phase asset management plan, and at the end of that, we will have our asset management plan delivered, and we will be updating it. Like we mentioned before, it's gonna be a living document, it's always gonna continue to update it, so we have current data and information, which allows us to give council better information to make better informed decisions. And that one is a cost, sorry, I should have mentioned, $80,000 through the MSI operating grant. And phase 2 as well is $85,000 through MSI operating. And the facilities assessment is $50,000 through the tax equalization reserve.
So just a question, and I don't know whether you have the answer for this or not, but when does the current MSI end? Because I don't know whether everybody got their email this morning or not, but the AUMA and RMA have both met with the minister and the ministerial department for MSI, and they have both rejected the proposed agreement.
Oh.
New funding.
It ends in 2022.
Okay.
But they told us at RMA that it was gonna end in the spring and they were gonna replace it.
I shouldn't say rejected it, but they're not in agreement with the proposal.
So our 5-year plan obviously takes us beyond that date, but we have to forecast on something,
Right.
so.
Is there any other questions for tech services operating?
Yes.
On the MSI operating, I think a day or two ago it was mentioned, there's only limited places it can be used. I guess, can you just explain a little bit where it can be used, I guess?
Well, they just have their eligibility criteria, so it can be used in any department, but within that department, there's certain criteria, like you can't fund wages, operational wages, unless maybe there's a partnership between yourself and another municipality, or it's a contract for something specific. So that would be one example of something that would be ineligible through MSI operating. It is it's broader than some other grants, but they still have criteria that you have to follow. And I can quickly bring up the guidelines, and they've got a good summary there,
Okay.
just between, if you like.
Bonds?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just on the project costs in the MSI grant, well, it said the project costs, for example, in phase 2, it's 85,000, and the operating grant is 85,000, the MSI operating grant. Does that mean that we have no cost to us for that one?
Solely funded through MSI, not taxes, correct?
Okay. So, but we still have a total amount of, for the asset management, we still have a total amount of about $250,000.
For the 3 phases?
No, not the 3 phases, I mean the whole asset management for the county.
Yeah, the 3 phases, so yeah,
Yeah.
80,000, 85,000, and then I think our first phase cost us 16,000. So you're just right around the 200 mark for the 3 phases, but then, yes, if you take the facilities assessment into account, you're at the 250.
Yeah, so it doesn't cost the county a whole lot compared to what we get out of it.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Other questions?
Okay, thank you.
So for utilities, I'm gonna invite Jen to come and sit beside me, just because, most of the utilities operating budget is based on the rates, and she spent a lot of time with Craig developing how we do the full cost recovery without tax support, other than the McCain's debenture payment. But anyway, most of it stayed fairly similar to what it was in 2018. Some big changes between 17 and 18 were the South Co-op agreement. That's in R3, where our Moon River agreement was added to, and we added 150-some thousand. Now that was reduced by 20,000.
Yeah, I think that was for the picture butte portion, because we changed our memorandum of understanding there.
Oh, yeah, right. For the Diamond City pump house.
Yeah, it's just part of the rates now.
Yeah, okay. So if you recall, that was a issue that had gone on for years and years, and we finally got an agreement signed there last year, so.
We were, just for information, we were billing that out separately, so Craig and I would spend time at the end of every year, calculate based on costing the time that was spent there, and then bill picture butte separately. But since that time, an agreement with and included in the rates has been done, so that's why there's a reduction. It was about anywhere between $24,000 and $28,000.
Morris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like I'm somewhat familiar with the Northside co-op, you know, like anything the county assists the Northside with, and that is if our operational manager, if he is gone on holidays, you guys fill in and a bunch of other things. But I know the North County Potable Water Co pays for all these extra services, what you do. But I don't believe you quite recover everything on the south side. Is that right?
Actually, it's the opposite. So we charge per hour or per time that we do services on the north side, like vacation coverage when Marty was away. That happened one time this year. It's the first time that's happened. There's other things like emergency call-outs where we bill them directly for those costs. On the south side, we have an agreement that pays us for one operator full-time, year-round, but we also have operational responsibility of the entire system. We don't have managerial responsibility, but we have operational responsibility. So if there's a valve that needs to be turned, we're the ones that have to be there to turn that valve. If there is a water break, we have to have somebody on site to supervise that break, somebody who's certified that's the law, that's why Marty is certified in the north. The south does not have that. So we have an operational agreement that pays us for one full-time burdened operator, his annual salary and a pickup truck. So we're compensated to the level that we felt was necessary because of all of the, we respond to emergency calls, our on-call operator covers the after hours, all of those kind of things.
Okay,
Can I carry on? Thank you. Yeah, so you provide that full-time services to the south side, but you don't do it on the north side,
No.
But how do you recover the expenses for what it takes to have a full-time person down there from the south side?
They pay us for a full-time operator, then we just track his hours.
Plus the use of a vehicle and all of that?
Yeah, so it's burdened at 155,000, I think, or 150,000. So that'd be his salary, his benefits, and the pickup truck and the operating expense for that pickup truck.
So, yeah,
It was all
okay,
out.
no, that's fine. So then, if I'm hearing that is, like, we have an operational manager, but I can see he's not gonna be there forever either. Maybe that's gonna be another avenue the North County Public Water Co-op could look at too. Get that same type of person on the north side too, maybe, yeah.
Absolutely, and we've mentioned that to some of the people involved, that we would be prepared to provide that service on the north upon request if they wanted to do so.
That was working good,
Yeah.
and that was just the first time it happened now.
okay,
So really the big one change you'll notice is that salaries, wages, and benefits went down, and again, that's because of my allocation where I was 25% to that department, I think I went down to 15. And then, so that created with the minimal increase in cost of living and salaries, anticipated salaries, then the offset was actually a net negative.
They also reduce their overtime slightly
That too.
as well because it's not required. So we just, in the case of emergency, there will be some overtime, but it's so rare anymore. And we can adjust for that within the budget. Generally, this department operates at cost recovery. Depending on the type of year we've had, there's often surpluses, which is a transfer to the reserve. So that transfer would just be adjusted based on any changes there.
so Jen, when you mentioned that, so like when we had the two water main breaks at Shaughnessy, was that, they'd both be overtime, no? How does that work?
Any overtime there, I believe in that case though, council had a resolution to fund some of that from reserve because of the circumstances there and the extra costs for water trucks and things that were brought in because there was no water services available. So I know in that particular case, some of that is going to be funded from reserve as per council. But in other cases, we could probably just review at year end and see where the budget was at and then fund it with their own sources. But it's coming out of the utility reserve anyway, so it's kind of a wash that way.
And one thing that's coming into place this year is our newest operator, who was an operator in training, is now going to be a full certified operator, so he doesn't have to travel with somebody anymore. I mean, that's a big issue that I have a problem with the certification program in that regard, is that they can't work on their own, and it's a full year that they have to work with somebody else. So we're going to have, those guys will be split up and will be able to cover more area, hence limiting the overtime that's required. So if that's helps that out.
Buzz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, you talked about the utility reserve, so what do you top that off with?
Generally, we have an annual budget that's a transfer to the reserve. So that's for future capital. So once the operational costs are more or less covered, So we're at cost recovery through operations. Any difference, with the exception of the McCain's debt, will go towards that utility capital reserve.
Any other questions?
I was just, you want me to get into the rates now?
Yeah. Just explain.
So just when Craig and I were going through the budget this year, we always look at the city because of course that's who we purchase the water from. And they have, in their budget deliberations, put a 2% increase to the water rates for 2019, and I think it's 2 and 2.5 moving forward. The county will bring those rates forward to council in January for approval. So we budgeted that way with a rate increase of the 2%. We didn't put in a additional percentage for the county like we have in the past, as we are at full cost recovery plus, or at least that's what we're finding, and we were still able to increase the annual transfer to reserves. So when Craig and I reviewed everything and usage, even with the 2 dry years that we've had, we felt pretty comfortable just moving forward with the city's increase only.
Hey,
Thank you.
Just one comment from me, I think
You can go if you want. But the thing is, we don't purchase the water from the city. The city, we own the licenses. The city just processes it for us.
We purchase it from the city, because they process it.
we, they process, but we have the license. The county has the license.
For the north.
Yeah.
The south is they have their own license.
Yeah, but it's not the city.
No, not the license.
But that's-
Good morning.
Your hair looks good.
Thanks. To the juries. Since 4 AM working on his.
who's working on theirs?
Oh, just
I got an email from him.
an
at 4
update
o'clock
from
this
yesterday.
morning.
If you recall, we were talking about an accounting term that was insignificant or whatever. I think it was a couple.
Yeah.
The term is actually immaterial, and nobody could come up with that term. So at 4 in the morning, it was like bing. So I sent emails to everybody saying, I remember. You finally go to sleep.
Yeah, after you woke everybody else. Yeah, or return the favor. I'm going to present corporate services department budgets. And I'll start with assessment and taxation, which begins on page 259. $259. Okay, so in 2019, we are looking at a slight decrease in tax support. And I believe that's mostly due to, looking here, thanks, contract and general services, which is pretty much the linear assessment fee
And services.
and services. That's the line by itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just start at the top there. So sales of goods and services, this is the monies received for tax certificates of tax notification fees. Just a modest increase there. The other revenue line, R2, that's the amount from the province that we're receiving for doing the DIP properties, designated industrial properties. We have recommended that amount go straight into a reserve, as it is kind of a one-time fee. We don't want to rely on that because we're going to have it for the next 2 years. So it's kind of an in and an out, but it's good. It's $100,000 over the 3 years if we keep the contract the whole time. E1, nothing to report there other than increases for COLA, as we mentioned yesterday. We've done the 2%.
So crazy, before you
Yes.
go too much further, can I ask you, R1, goods, sale of goods and services,
Mhm.
what is a tax notification fee for? What is that?
Tax notification fees is when they send out notification letters about tax sales, about upcoming penalties and all of that. But I think it's a one-time annual fee, right? Yeah.
When a property is going up for tax sale, then we have the right to charge back any fees associated with that tax sale, be it advertising, if we were to bring in an auctioneer, for example, all of those things can get put back onto the tax roll. But, and then there's the fee, so.
Yeah, there's an annual, they do one annual notification to anybody who has overdue accounts that they are in the arrears and whatnot. And I know those are
Land titles too.
The bulk of it is from tax certificates, though. The bulk of the revenue there. Tax certificates to lawyers, agencies mainly.
So that means when you sell, if you split an acreage off, and is that what you mean by that? So you have to pay the taxes as the date of the separation of your title? So is that what you mean? Is that what that is?
Tax certificate is usually when you sell a property or subdivide a property, they'll ask for a tax certificate from the municipality to say if there's anything owing on the property or any liens on it from us, or any utilities owing, any accounts receivable owing. So lawyers generally want that to make sure the account's paid up to date before their purchaser buys it.
What do we charge for a certificate, do?
25.
Is it 25? I thought it was 50.
25?
25.
Oh,
Sorry. Waits on it. Okay. Okay, so E2, contract and general services, I mentioned that the decrease there is mainly due to that linear assessment fee not being charged as we're changing the way that we're doing it, and we're doing the assessment for them now. Services by other departments. There's quite a large decrease here, and this is mainly due to that rate review that Jen mentioned yesterday, where they reviewed all of the user needs and how much time they're taking of the IT department and splitting it more fairly among the departments. So assessment benefited pretty good there, I see. And E4 is that transfer of the agreement revenues going into reserves. Down below is Les's projections for assessment and growth in inflation numbers for 19, 20, and 21. The 20 million and the 10 million, those are the numbers that we base on the after growth numbers for you when we present I think it works out to 0.8% after growth, so those are the numbers we use there. It's pretty steady what he uses there. He's also pretty conservative because that's not something we really want to get wrong, to the bad anyways.
I just have a question. Inflation and inflation projections. So in 2017, it was 15 million, 10, 10, 10, and then back up in 2021 is 15. Can you just explain why?
I cannot.
Okay.
I would have to ask Les. I'd have to ask Les and get back to you if you want to know. 25 and 15, though, I know is out of the normal for our budget. We usually use 20 and 10. So maybe he was predicting a good year that year. I'm not sure for 2021, but I can check and get back to you.
Okay, sorry, I did look, and for clarification, sorry Tracy, the tax notification fee is $25, the tax certificate fee is $45.
Ah, I was close.
Yeah.
Thought it was 50. I'm pretty sure we paid around 50 for ours.
And I guess we're going to, once the budget is passed and approved, we're going to review our fees and charges anyway, and that would be something we'd relook at, correct?
Well, they are kind of reviewed at this time too, but yeah, we do the sleep schedule of fees in January, so.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, no other questions on assessment? It's a pretty small budget there. We'll move on to finance and administration. So this is mainly Jed's department, though I do fall under this budget as well, my team. It's page 269. Yeah. So this budget also includes HR for this year. We will be backing that out when we get Dan's budget next year. There's a modest increase in taxes of $43,000 in tax support. I'll just get Jen probably to walk you through here, because she prepared most of this.
So on the revenue side, we have some operating projects. We have one there that we are proposing be funded through grant for $27,000, and that is for an exterior, or pardon me, it's for a purchase order module. So it's a piece of software that would tie to our financial software, and it would allow purchase orders to be done electronically rather than on written pieces of paper. It would also tie to our inventory, our accounts payable, our costing. All of those would tie together. We wouldn't have outstanding POs that we weren't aware of, because they would all be tracked electronically. And as soon as that payables is made, that PO is cleared off. So we'd like to add that module to our Bellamy system. We have been working on kind of another module, but it's not tied to our finance software. So, or not module, sorry, another way of doing it, but it's not tied to our financial software. We feel that this would be much more beneficial, and then every department that's involved from start to finish in the purchasing process will have that cleared.
It's also gonna help wrap up our year end a little quicker. I mean, currently, what are you, end of February before you start rolling things together, when you're finally still receiving invoices in? So you're waiting a long time at year end to get the year end invoices in. Sometimes they're still coming in March or April, but if you've got the purchase order number entered and you've got the amount estimated, you know it right now as soon as it's issued. If it was issued in November, so she can go ahead and close with the estimated numbers, which should bring year end to close a lot, make it a lot less stressful for Jen at year end.
The next revenue item is sales and goods and services, and we do have an increase here. A lot of this is just based on penalties. We're doing, I think I've mentioned this before to council with the financial reports, where our collections are a lot higher. We're following up a bit more. We're getting those penalties paid. I know lots of people make requests to have them waived, but that's not always the case. And then just, we have had more outstanding. So I just think with collections, feel comfortable doing a bit of an increase there. So we went ahead with that. It also includes, one of those other revenues. I was thinking NSF fees, but that falls under other revenues. So, which also has a bit of an increase there. You'll see kind of a significant one. And that's just charges, administrative charges to other organizations and different agreements. So we wanted to increase that too. Just bring it more in line with where it should be. Fines and penalties. So this fines and penalties in return on investments used to show up in what we call the general account. We had it separate, but it's not actually a department. It falls under finance and administration. So this year we just combined it into finance and administration rather than having two separate departments showing up in the budget that don't need to be. So it remains the same. The return on investments, we did increase by $50,000 just based on where our investments are at and what we have invested. And the $130,000 for fines and penalties is a transfer to our capital reserves as per our reserve policy. Interest, yeah, sorry. The interest, which is the $130,000 gets, no, sorry, the $300,000, which is interest, gets transferred to capital reserves as per policy. And if that number is higher or lower, it's just a wash. Whatever we receive for interest is transferred to our capital reserves as per our policy. So, and then transfers from reserves, that $108,000. A portion of that, $15,000 of that is kind of a wash as well. That's for any, we have a expense line for any accounts that we have to clear throughout the year, so any uncollectibles basically. So we just fund that from the reserve if we need to. And then the others are for part of the operating projects down below. So one is for an exterior fence from the reserve funds for $30,000. So I could probably get Devin to speak to this a little bit, but the idea is to maybe put up an iron fence around the parking lot and around the side of the building here, in the hopes that we could maybe secure it a bit, maybe prevent some of the cross traffic through the area, protect the building and staff a little bit more. We have a new shed here, which I think puts in a blind spot also for viewing if there's people back in the corner. So it's just more of a security fence, I suppose you could call it, but aesthetically pleasing at the same time.
Yeah, just up the sides, not at the back.
That's a nice delicate way of
Yeah.
saying.
That's my political. Politically.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand that the strip here and part of it in the parking lot is owned by the city.
Yes.
So that's about 15 or 20 feet or something like that. And we were going to ask the city to donate that to us. Has anybody ever discussed that?
Yes, they've given us a couple of options. One was to keep leasing it for $20 a year, and the second option was, initially they offered it to us for $50,000, but we asked to reconsider, so they said we could either keep leasing it for $20 a year, or we could purchase it for $8,500. But we still think that that's a bit high, so that's one of the items we'll be discussing with our meeting.
Especially after what we just gave them. That's what I was referring to, yeah. Sorry.
And the other operating project there is to do some caulking in all of the windows, outside windows of the building. Again, Rick or Devin could probably speak more to this, but it seems like it needs to be done, I guess, for Rick, help me here.
Yeah, so, well, Lauren,
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
the caulking, the building caulking, you go around and you look at perpendicular to all the windows, and virtually every single one has daylight shining through it because of just the caulking's old and it needs to be replaced. We had talked about doing it as part of the bricks, but we couldn't find a contractor that was interested in doing the work that year. I think we'll have a better chance now. We've talked to another couple of contractors that we found that do that type of work, and they're interested in doing it for us next year.
And those will be funded, both those two projects would be funded from the administrative building reserve that we have. And then the last portion of that transfer is just for the safety and disability coordinator services. It's a gradual reduction. Gradually that transfer will be reduced from year to year, but we use safety reserve funds to help sort of offset that position for the time being, as it was new last year, we're just gradually transitioning it in. So that's the revenue side. As far as expenditures go, salaries, benefits, and wages. So it does look like a big increase here. It is and it isn't. I have to own that. I believe I made an entry error last year. I don't know if I entered a 0 instead of a 1 or 1 instead of a 2. And when I went back and looked at things, I believe that I may have made an entry error last year. So we're adjusting for it this year. When I look at our financials to the end of the year, administration is looking at a bit of a deficit, but that will be offset by our additional revenues and penalties that we're receiving. So it worked out all right in 2018, but I wanted to ensure that correction was in the books. So I apologize in advance for that. I own it. I am human. So that plus the 2% also is in there for the increase. The second part is contract and general services. Not a huge change there. One change that we did make is we no longer are paying Ag Services that $8,500 to come and do the groundwork. So we moved that into the contract and services line to pay for the contractor, or a portion of the contractor there, and additional other maintenance that may be required. So that was more a movement within the budget than all increase. Material supplies and operating costs, we were able to reduce this slightly. Again, some of this is due to just the reduction we're hoping with the solar panels to see in the utility costs and gain with that. So we kind of maximized that within this budget. Last year we didn't realize all of it, of course, knowing that the project was being completed in 2018. So in 2019 we're hoping to see more of that. Services by other departments, ours ended up getting reduced. Again, $8,500 of that is the Ag Services portion that we're no longer paying. And then just in the adjustment with, we had some fleet rates in there that were a bit high for us, and then of course the IT rates are in there as well. The operating projects for $92,000, which I already spoke to, all of which are funded through either a grant or transfer from reserve. And then the transfers to reserves, so, this includes 75,000 for the building upgrades, and then 300,000 of that is the interest that we've earned that will go to the capital reserves.
I just had a question about, I know upstairs, you're in charge of the lease there for upstairs, and do we contact them and see if they've gotten any issues, or how do we deal with that if they want any upgrades or anything?
Cole is kind of the building manager, so I think he talks to them on the regular. If they have any operational or building maintenance issues, they'll come and see him about that. Anything that we're doing that's big though, that affects the whole building, I believe that's always coordinated with them upstairs. And it is within the agreement that we have as well. It's our job to do a lot of that maintenance.
Okay, no further questions there. We'll just move on to the IT budget on 279. Jill will just have to give me a little hand here on R1 because it's not getting verbiages.
What is it?
Sales of goods and services, 50,000 one-time collection in IT 2019.
Oh, that's the airport.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So R1 and R2 are basically the same thing. Those are departmental charges for IT support. Just that we've shown the airport as a separate line as they're no longer an internal department. And because the city will be taking over in 2020, we will be providing those services to the airport. So our 3 is $75,000. This is an annual draw from the reserves that he needs to fund schedule replacements. Kind of fluctuates every year depending on what's being replaced that year. These are for not capital purchases, so we don't capitalize any of our computers or short-term things like phones, tablets, anything. Because they rotate so frequently, we replace them every 3 years, that they don't really benefit from capitalizing. In salaries, wages, and benefits, just modest increase there for COLA. Contract and general services, most of the increase there is due to just increases in data processing and software costs. Not much of an increase though. Materials, operating, and supplies. These are increases for computer equipment and supplies, and this is the line that is partially, well, all offset by that $75,000 transfer that he pulls. Services by the departments, this is his own charge to his own department for IT services because they do have their own user needs there. And operating projects. He has $15,000 in there, which is being funded from reserves for upgrading the network switch upgrades. Really don't know much about it other than upgrading of network switches.
He has a project.
Does he?
Can you give us some more detailed information on that? I don't quite follow that.
It's upgrading the switches that go with the network. And that's, yeah.
What network?
Did it help the
It's part of the.
see the internal network? The IT network switches? I'll see if-
That's all he had was one thing. I'll ask him.
That's just the big power, that big red off button in the server room.
This is like a presidential thing.
Yeah, and E6 transfers to reserves, so this is the balancing part of his budget, the money that he collects in. He has to set money aside for these internal replacements. So again, it fluctuates every year depending on what needs to be purchased, the in and the out, they're pretty close. He puts in more than he takes out, so that is building a little bit, but not terrible amounts, $20,000 a year. As you can see, a network switch will eat up most of that 1 year. And down below, he has details of how much each department gets charged for IT services. So you can see that Public Works and Finance Admin, they both take the biggest, as we both have the biggest user needs for IT support, they take the biggest chunk of that, and then split down further from there. Council taking 56,000 for user support. Any questions?
How did we possibly take that much?
We did based on the had
I blame Morris.
and some.
We're not that technically challenged.
Morris, I blame Morris. Any questions on Doug's budget? If you have a burning need to know about those network switches, I can find out for you. And that's my department. That's it. And I can hand it over to Larry now.
I did give the idea of
Okay,
Thanks, Jersey.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wait, shortage problem here.
Hey, Kyle. We know you can handle it. No, you can see Tracy.
It feels bad for me that I've been up since 4.
If I get the blue cup too.
Lori?
I did pull up the MSI operating guidelines, if you just want a quick overview of them.
Sure.
Okay, so it's broken down by categories for the most part. So the first one is what they call governance. So it includes support of elected officials for consulting fees for counselor training, so basically any kind of orientation. Planning and development is in there, so they will support some planning documents. General administrations, which includes hardware, software, consulting fees, organizational reviews, salary and wage reviews. The next area is more with regards to community services, so culture, children and family services, environmental sustainability, housing, libraries, buildings, etc. So basically it's just operational support for those types of facilities or consulting fees if it's required. The next one is more infrastructure, so we have airports, operational support related to infrastructure such as lighting and signage, infrastructure management support, municipal infrastructure management systems, data gathering, public transit, which we don't have, operational support for roadways, bridges, sidewalks, bikeways, etc. for studies related to those. So a lot of these are document related or consulting fee related. So that also applies to waste, wastewater, and water. And then the next would be shared support for municipal internships. So if we were to have the municipal intern program again, some staff development and volunteer development. So those are kind of a quick summary of the categories that are eligible. And we do get about $110,000 a year of just MSI operating funds.
I'll just add to that, we have used MSI operating mainly for studies in that sort of thing. We did use it for the intern program when we had it. We used to use it for our annual strategic planning costs, $20,000. We quit doing that a few years ago because it's an annual cost that we incur, and we didn't want to, when MSI is always up in the air as to whether we're going to get it, we didn't want to start to rely on that. So we try to focus more on using it for one-time projects. That are kind of just like studies, like purchasing of a software program or something like that, because it's not something we want to rely on, as we all know it could end at any time, so.
Larry.
Right, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Council. I am pleased to have the opportunity to present to you the 2019 and a little bit beyond proposed Community Services Department's, I'll use plural, budgets. I'll turn your attention initially to page 299, please. And I'd just like to point out that this overview on this page includes the activities and the responsibilities of the director position, the Economic Development Department, and Community Services, whereas the Emergency Services Department and Planning Departments will be presented separately as they're broken out. They're a little more complex in nature, and hence the individual treatment of those two departments. So starting off with R1 for 2019, 29,500, you'll see there, 4,500 of that amount is the annual contribution the county makes towards the Alberta Summer Games. So that's kind of a constant. The other 25,000 is only it's there, it shows up in the budget, but it's only going to be accessed if required, and it's for economic development business initiatives should they arrive. And that's an example of that might be, let's say there's a large industry, a large business that's looking to relocate or locate and establish in Lethbridge County, and maybe the county has to do some legwork, perhaps some surveying, some consultations, some legal information required, et cetera, So that's what that money would be used for, and would only be used if, again, required and the opportunity necessitates.
Just a question, have we used that in the past?
No, we have not.
Okay.
No, I think it was born out of a possible, an opportunity the county had there in 2016, I guess a couple of years ago now. And I think in the 2018 budget was the first time we had that amount in there, but it wasn't accessed, it wasn't needed in 2018. You're welcome. Moving down to expenditures, E1, nothing irregular there, just inflationary COLA kind of increases. E2, contracted and general services, again, kind of the same. I think that's probably a 2% calculation that shows that moving outward over the next 3 years. And the majority of that is for legal services. Materials, supplies, and operating costs, that's bumped up a little bit based on expenditures. It's very small in any bit, as you can see. And some of that, or a good chunk of that, goes towards supporting our parades and sometimes a few little kind of promotional items and oddball things such as that. Services by other departments, as you'll see there, again, not a huge amount, but it has doubled from last year. And I know there were a number of kind of changes the way the information technology department provides services and equipment and so on. So I don't know the entire breakdown of why that's gone up double, by about $15,000, but that's the single biggest increase really in the overall departmental budget rate there. Grants to individuals and other organizations, again, that's a constant from past years you will see, and moving forward into 2020 and 2021. And the bulk of that, in fact, all of it really is for family community support services, for library requisition, contribute an amount to that, and as well for the, the Alberta Summer Games. That was noted in the transfers from reserves up in R1. Operating projects, you'll see we have that pegged at $10,000, and the box towards the bottom or center of the page, actually, I guess in this case, shows an operating projects breakdown, and that's previously been discussed with our previous Economic Development Committee, and I believe it as well was brought forward to council and presented and kind of supported overall in principle. And it's $5,000 annually to assist with foreign direct investment projects. And there is a little write-up on that on page 303. Essentially, it's about working with regional neighbors to engage and re-engage with foreign investment opportunities, China, India, Europe, and so on, and to promote and support continued missions and enhancing our relationships with businesses that are looking to expand into our area and beyond. The other small amount there, the $5,000 development of a Highway 3 corridor, that as well is described a little bit more on page 303, and it's to promote and support a regional approach to the Lethbridge-Taber Agri-Food Corridor. and that's proposed to carry on an annual basis. Again, a small amount, but it shows, that we're committed, the county is committed overall, and does provide some funds for small projects and small contributions and so on to work together with our regional partners as required. Total tax support change there is just about $54,000 for the year. And the bulk of that really, well, again, a little bit of additional monies for operating projects and a reduction in transfers from reserves. So rather than an actual increase in expenditures by much, it's more a loss or a reduction in revenues through reduced transfers. That is the initial presentation there, again excluding Planning and Development Department and Emergency Services, which are following momentarily, unless there are any questions or comments or discussion on any of that. Questions?
Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome, thank you. We'll move now to page 309, the Planning and Development Department. And this department overall, as presented, proposes about a $43,000 increase in tax support from last year. And again, a big part of that, similar to the last budget I just presented, is a reduction in not so much, a combination of transfers from reserves and grants. We aren't anticipating any grants for that department in 2019 and moving forward. Revenues are up a bit in respect of R2, sales of goods and services, and that's for the sale of primarily permits, development permits, land use applications, zoning amendment bylaws, and those sorts of things, letters of compliance that we issue. We charge a fee for that, and so those are based a little bit more on actuals, but they're still, I think, pretty conservative in the overall estimate there.
Morris? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Larry, why is that there is no grants available in 19? Like there was for the 2 previous years, there was a grant there. What kind of grant was that, and why was it there, and why is it not there?
Sure, no, appreciate the question, Councilor Zeenstra. In 2017-2018, you'll see there that $38,625. That was for the Picture Butte IDP. And because it took a little bit longer than initially anticipated when it was first undertaken, that amount was kind of just bumped forward year after year. It's wasn't meant to represent an additional grant. So yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Moving down to E1, again, just the normal COLA increases with respect to salaries and wages, benefits. Contracted and general services, that is WORSC. Again, I think it's based on moving out to 2020 and 2021, a 2% anticipated inflationary increase. Services by other departments, similar to what we saw in the overall community services department, administration department presentation. There is an increase in information technology costs there, and I'm not sure if we're wondering why all that is, but the explanation simply is increased by other departments. A rate review was completed with respect to software and mobile hardware and all the servers, and I know we saw recently, just this morning I think, about IT replacements for major pieces of equipment, servers and so on, so there's some additional costs reflected there. Operating projects, this is a decrease from last year, which showed about 63,000. We're a little under half of that. And the breakdown is below in the box there for 2019 Hamlet studies. We've completed one, 2 more are underway in 2019. That's a $10,000 cost. An IDP with Barron's is $10,000, and a grouped country residential land use study is happening in 2019 as well, and that is $10,000 for your total of $30,000. With respect to the Barron's IDP, maybe if needed, Hillary can back me up here or someone else, but I believe there was a commitment made by Lethbridge County to assist the tiny, 350 or so population village of Barons to get the IDP done, because it is a requirement, as we all know, under the Municipal Government Act. So,
Can I, Larry, just a question? So in 2017, there was 25,000 put aside for that. And then again, looks like proposed for 2019 is 10,000. So was the 25 used or no? Okay. It was intended to start then, is that?
yes, that's what I recall, and it never got underway. It was
Okay.
just too many other things, I think, on the go.
Okay.
But now that we're required.
Okay, thank you.
Steve?
Did we assist them with them doing their MDP at that time? Or am I mistaken?
I think that's what you meant, Larry, was we were gonna assist with the MVP.
Seemed like that was, the first step was them doing their own municipal development plan, and then in the future was the IDP.
Thanks. Maybe Hillary can clarify here.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yeah.
Just to Councillor Campbell's question, yes, we had a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, committed to helping them with their MVP. And then they actually were able to secure a grant from the province to finish their MVP. And so moving forward, as we do have to do an IDP with them, it was thought that the best way to move forward would be to have funds allocated towards that. And that's something that we'll be working towards in the next year.
So don't leave the chair, because Larry might not quite be able to answer this one. I'm not sure. But you talked, I have 2 questions. First one is under contracted services. So the money you pay ORSC, is that a retainer fee, or is that a set fee for what they do for the entire year, or do they bill us extra, or how does that work?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regards to the fees for ORSC, that is their what you might consider their retainer fee. They do all the subdivisions for the county. That's part of that. They provide advisory services with regards to any planning documents that we have coming in that help facilitate the land use bylaw amendment and MDP amendments that we did this last year. So that's kind of their fees overall. They also do a lot of background research for things. For the municipality, along with their 40 other municipalities that they are retained by. So that goes into a lot of that background information that I get to help provide you with better information for decision making. With regards to projects, when we do have a project, let's say something that's above and beyond what is considered part of their day-to-day duties, one example would be the Section 26 area structure plan that they helped us with. That's a fee above that. So, but they do give us an incredibly good rate on doing any planning, like those works that are above and beyond what their day-to-day is. And because they've been with the county for so long and in the region for so long, they do provide a really good value with regards to that. So, but those projects are, I would say, now that since I've been on board, fairly few and far between. So maybe one comes up every year and a half or so.
Okay, and then perhaps my other question doesn't maybe fit into planning and development, but we're going out to the year 2021. So where are the funding or the money coming from for the ICF agreements? Where would we find that?
I'm not aware that we actually allocated extra funds towards that because it was being done, as far as I know, through the CAO and through Larry as an internal documentation. So we weren't contracting that out to anybody. And I don't think you're right.
If I can elaborate, I think what you're asking is where is the money for the shared services? Is that?
Well, not necessarily that, but
Okay.
I'm sure that they're gonna be, like, are you gonna prepare all the documents and send them to Edmonton yourselves? Or wherever it goes?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's the idea. The same with the remainder of the IDPs.
Is that not a fairly onerous task?
I don't think it's necessarily onerous. We've allocated, we have the resources and it's just a matter of, those are the priorities that we have for the next 1.5 to 2 years.
Okay.
I had a question before you go. So we've completed Monarch Hamlet study, and you said we were doing 2 for 2019, is that correct? Which 2 are we doing?
So we've actually, we're nearing completion for the Iron Springs and the Turin Hamlet studies. Those are ones that I'm working on with Steve Hardy. So the background work is done on those, and we'll be doing out a survey like we did with the Monarch study. So hopefully those will be done sometime in the new year, and then we'll be starting the next 2 for 2019. So Turin and Iron Springs are actually allocated in the 2018 budget, and then the next 2 will be, I think it might be Shaughnessy and Chin are the ones that we're doing next year, and then the following year we'll have the last 2. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks for those questions, and thank you, Hillary, for providing the detail on those matters. If there's nothing further then with planning and development, we'll move to please page 319, Emergency Services Department. And this is a department in a bit of state of change and flux right now, so there may be some questions or some issues here as well that I may need some backup from some of my colleagues. I know our CAO Ann has been involved in some of that, and I think still some things to be determined, but we'll move forward. I'll present what I have here and of course entertain any questions that council may have.
So I got one before you get too far involved.
Yes.
Page 315, it says there's 4.5 full-time employees. How does that file out?
Go ahead, yeah, it's less than that, but.
So this document obviously needs to be revised since it was received.
Right.
But this includes a 3rd CPO, and the 0.5 is Amelia because she's shared with my department and emergency services.
So 3 CPOs or 4? 3.
3. Plus Daryl.
Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A good point, just that should be correct. It should be 3.5 proposed. 2.5 existing, proposed to add an additional one, and that will be reflected in what we're going to see here on page 319. Okay, so starting off on line R1, $5,000 grant is for an emergency program preparedness exercise that we're proposing to do in 2019. Sale of goods and services, that amount, as you can see, is increasing or proposed to increase about $50,000 from 2018, and that's due to the actuals with respect to fire and motor vehicle calls. So, I think we've been a little modest there, and of course you can't predict how many emergency calls will occur in any given year, but the trend seems to be that it's higher than what we have had in the past. Fines and penalties, the same kind of ideas apply with respect to fines generated from our CPOs. We've been conservative, I think, in our estimates in the past, and the increase of $50,000 there is more in line with the reality and the actual numbers that we are seeing. Transfers from reserve, way down there proposed, and that, and maybe, I don't know if there's anything I'll miss here, Jennifer, but there aren't any major purchases of equipment with respect to the fire departments in our region with whom we have agreements. So you'll see it fluctuates. For example, in 2018 it was about $340,000. In 2020 it's looking like it'll be $770,000, and much smaller in 2019. And that's just again a reflection of how the replacement schedules occur in the individual agreements that we have with the numerous departments. The $36,500 that you do see before you there, that would be for equipment for a 3rd CPO should council decide to proceed with adding that position. And that would be, again, equipment only, vests and radios and phones and safety equipment, and boots and uniforms, et cetera, et cetera.
Can I just add?
Sure.
Sorry, I think that in R3-2, there was a slight amount added for the, included in increased fines for the addition of a third CPO. So should that position not get approved, that amount will also be backed out. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. Expenditures down to E1. The amount you'll see there for 2019 includes the position that is vacant and again in flux right now. So that amount has been retained in there. And then for 2020, it shows an increase there, and that's if there is a third CPO in. And then I apologize, but I believe the amount shown for 2021 under E1, that may be an error, if I'm not mistaken. It looks like we've added it a second time. Jennifer, do you know offhand? I don't believe it should be that amount. I think it should have been more consistent with what we're showing in 2020. Is that correct? For E1.
Oh, that, yes, sorry, I know what happened there. That includes, yeah, that includes. So what happened is if you look under operating projects, the third CPO is listed as an operating project with $110,000 as wages. Those wages were moved into salaries and wages in 20 and 21. That's why it's showing that increase. What's that?
It looks like we've added it in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, we have two.
It appears
Yeah.
that
Oh, I see.
may be an error on our part.
Okay, I'll take a look into it.
Yeah. Okay, emergency services agreements. E2 increasing gradually right from 2017. You'll see consistently increasing right through to 2021. And again, that's part of the overall review of the emergency services department. And where that all goes, time will tell. There are still decisions needed to be made in that regard, but for the time being, we're consistent and steady in showing those amounts. Contracted and general services, it's gone down a little bit, about $5,000 from last year. That's E3 due to adjustments based again on actual expenditures. Materials, supplies, and operating costs, increase of $16,000 for peace officer program operations should council decide to proceed with a third CPO. E5, services by other departments. There's a combination there of fleet and information technology services that are provided, hence the increase, a little bit, maybe more than 2%, but we saw some more significant increases, especially with respect to information technology for upgrading servers and so on. Operating projects, again, the operating projects breakdown box just towards the lower half of the page there shows what is scheduled and planned for 2019, or proposed at least. And the biggest bite there, or the biggest piece you'll see, is that third CPO full-time equivalent wages and equipment, and that would be about $146,500. Again, should council decide to proceed with that. And then I mentioned right off the top under R1 the grants of $5,000, and that would be for an emergency operations exercise for a total of $151,500 there. Transfers to reserves, that's a steady amount. You'll see right across the 5 years that are presented, the past 2 years, proposed for 2019 and out to 2021. And that breakdown is $222,000 is annually budgeted and transferred to reserves for capital equipment replacement. And that's fire trucks and breathing apparatuses and all the pieces of very costly but critical equipment that our local fire departments that were contracted with purchase. So that amount contributes to that. That $222,000 of that, in fact, the remaining $45,000 is a combination of two things. One is when the emergency generator, the big green monster kind of in the awkward spot in our parking lot that most of us have either backed into the safety posts or almost have numerous times, speaking from experience, that was $200,000 was borrowed from an operating project reserve under emergency services. And every year, $20,000 is paid back towards that. So of that remaining $45,000 under E7 transfers to reserve, $20,000 is to pay that back. And that will be complete in 2022, so we just have another 4 years. And the balance is a $25,000 annual contribution to an emergency contingency reserve. And that is for covering initial expenses and overall expenses when a disaster strikes. So if there's a major emergency in the county, obviously we need funds up front, and often, you know, if we're fortunate, we can recover some of that or most of it through the disaster recovery program through the province. But that's not always a guarantee, so money has been set aside for that. We're in a good position there right now. The reserve transfer policy states that it needs to be or should be maintained at a minimum of $100,000 and not more than a maximum of $1 million. And we're in good shape there. We're a little bit under $1 million, and you know, I don't know, perhaps if we're fortunate and don't have major disasters in the next few years and don't have to draw from it, you know, we could keep contributing and that would exceed the 1 million, or maybe follow the policy and hold it at 1 million, but to be determined. So that explains the additional $45,000 on top of the $222,000. And it shows then that an overall proposed increase would be in the $69,000 range for 2019. And that concludes the Emergency Services Department proposed operating budget. I imagine there may be questions.
So Larry, what happens when you buy something? Does it become part of fleet services, or does it become part of emergency services, or it becomes part of the contractor's fleet? Or because when you sell it, or ends its lifespan, like the fire truck in Coaldale, where does that money go, or what happens?
Sure, yeah, very good question, Mr. Chairman. And about, I'm going to say 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, somewhere right in that range, the equipment that the county has, for the most part, 50% ownership in the large apparatuses, the fire trucks and so on, with all the departments that we contract with. We have monetary ownership in those still, so that hasn't changed, but we now show it on the books as that the county does not own them legally in any way. So we don't insure them, we don't, you know, technically take any responsibility directly for maintaining them. So we've turned that over to those individual departments, but we retain that financial ownership component to them. And again, most of them are at the 50% mark. And when they sell the surplus ones, then whatever is comes back to the organization. If we've contributed 50% for the initial purchase, we retain and get back that 50%.
Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying down there, but should that be just called support then from the company instead of what you were saying? On the ownership, like we don't have the ownership per se anymore. However, we have the money in there. So why don't we just call support to whatever equipment?
So, Councillor Zinstra, if I may then, you're saying just kind of rename it or just call it something else?
That's what I would like to see.
I see.
It's not ownership anymore, so it's support to whatever equipment services the county support.
Mm-hmm.
I think given the fact too that the whole agreement are going to be negotiated and there's going to be one agreement for every, with all the fire departments, that's certainly something we could address through that process too. And I just had a question, Larry, too. E2, so that amount, 1.3 million, that is just for the operating amounts that we as the county give to the fire departments, correct?
That's correct. And maybe one point of clarification here that will help us all understand is previously, so again, prior to, I'm going to say about 2015, the Emergency Services Department actually contributed, and it showed in the budget, to capital purchases. And although technically the county still does through the operating budget, however. And again, that's because of that change in ownership. So we don't, on paper, technically own them, legally own them. Financially, we have the same investment that the county always has had.
Thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, there's two questions I got for you. Well, first, I'm sure that we contribute to the insurance and everything like that the other ones have. And second of all, didn't we just purchase a new vehicle? So where do we find that?
Yes, again, the same arrangement. There are, well, one for Coaldale, right, that the county owns outright. There may be one or two others, but we contribute, again, we give the legal ownership on paper to those departments, because as you know, those trucks are very technical and very high, just high tech and complicated. They have expensive pumps and so on. And for the county to ensure or take responsibility for having them maintained and serviced regularly, when we don't even have access, we probably, for all I know, we don't even maybe have keys to those trucks. Maybe somewhere in fleet services they do, but it just kind of doesn't make sense. We felt, I think that was why the change occurred 3 years ago, for us to literally have our hands on, even though we own them on.
So follow up on that one.
Mhm.
So then we can't use it as an asset either?
No.
Yeah. Consider operating, again, the way we're structured now, a change from a few years ago.
Morris?
I was just gonna clarify, so we do treat all purchases now as just a, kind of like a grant to an outside agency. We give them the money to buy it, basically. It's on their books, they insure it, they maintain it. We have nothing to do with ownership of it, other than we give them the money for whatever arrangement we've come up with, whether it's 75%, 50, or 100.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Morris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the new arrangement, what's in place now, that makes 100% sense, because it should be under the name and to the people what operate it. That's as simple as that.
How do we track when one of the fire departments gets rid of one of their vehicles and we receive our funding back? How do we do that?
Daryl has, the previous coordinator, he has the emergency apparatus replacement schedule. It's a spreadsheet that goes out, I believe, 20 years plus, that shows when each piece is scheduled to be replaced, and I think they follow it pretty closely. My understanding, though, is with fire departments and those type of, or fire trucks, sorry, and the overland, any type of the rescue units, there's not a lot of salvage value to them. There's just not a market for them. I understand that when they get so old, a lot of them go south on that run that they take down to Mexico. I think there's value in the trucks, like the chief trucks and whatnot there, but I think in the actual emergency services vehicles, I don't think there's a lot of salvage value attached to those. But yeah, we do have a schedule of those.
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks, Mr. Chairman. And just further to that, in each of the agreements we have with our departments, the exception being the city of Lethbridge, but the smaller departments, that is laid out. There's a schedule right at the back of each of those agreements, and it shows what equipment they have, which ones the county is responsible for contributing to, how much, and when they are scheduled to be replaced. So it's tracked. It's not loosey-goosey or anything. We definitely know what's coming up for replacement and what the expected salvage value of the outgoing piece of equipment might be.
Sorry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's this time. I would like to see the third CPO discussion parking lotted for now. I think with what's happened in the department, changes in the department, and going forward, how that's going to look, if the vacated role is filled, or how we decide to do that, I think we need to have a larger discussion about the CPO program and that moving forward. I understand, I think from the survey results that we got feedback on, there is, I think there's support for maintaining a level of service, and I think hearing from the CPOs, they would like to be on the road more and like to be in the county more, and I think we need to have a bigger discussion on how we address that, rather than through administrative help to the CPOs, or is maybe a supervisor role for the CPOs, or status quo. So I would like to see a larger discussion on that.
Larry?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just one further point to what Councillor Campbell just stated. I think that, yeah, obviously really needs to occur because it is a big decision, big issue. You may have noticed or not, just by the fact that it's not there anywhere in any of the budget presentations over the past 3 days, but the way it's currently presented and proposed, and that's all it is proposed for that third CPO, is the county isn't looking at this time to purchase a third vehicle. So if that position were to proceed, and again, after some further discussion and investigation, it might be some kind of hybrid model whereby that person could use one of the existing trucks of the two CPOs when they're off on training or vacation or some other reason for not being kind of on the job, and then providing, as noted as well by Councillor Campbell, some additional administrative support, because there is lots of paperwork. Every little call out to investigation and involvement they have, engagement with the community about a complaint or anything, they have to actually write up a report, enter it into a system, and it's all logged and categorized. And so there is a lot of paperwork, and as again pointed out, I think those guys are like the hands-on kind of components of their job, probably find that more satisfying than the administrative side of it. Thanks.
Ken?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. They actually don't need a truck for each one or whatever, because when they're off duty, then the truck stays here, and then the other one coming on takes the truck. That's the way it works. So, and then if they're all working at the same time, then they can ride around with one of the two trucks or whatever.
Morris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the thing is that it's a good idea to have some more discussion on it. A little while ago, when the RCMP was here, and they put a lot of emphasis on how much paperwork they got to do, and they would like to, or they would accept any help they can get, and somewhat in between the lines, we kind of offered, well, if you need somebody, we could make somebody available. Has that ever been looked at?
We've had some initial discussions with the RCMP, but certainly it's part of the larger discussion we're having with the overall review of the CPO. But it certainly could fit in, and then there'd be some revenue from that stream as well. So.
Is everybody comfortable going to parking lot? Yeah. Good, okay.
Thank you very much.
Tori? Sorry, Steve.
Just on the start of your report, it mentioned on the challenges, lack of shovel-ready land for commercial industrial development. I think we kind of need to be proactive on doing area structure plans so that businesses have, at least we're half a year down the road, or progress of being shovel-ready in certain areas. Because really, if you look at north of the river, there's really no land. There's no commercial development land available that's ready to go. So if we could do something for the Nobleford or Pitcher Butte area, both of those communities have mentioned that they don't have any land either. So I guess the question would be, do you know what an area structure plan would cost for, say, a quarter section or whatever it might be?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Campbell. I don't offhand, several $1,000s for sure, just depending on the complexity and the amount of engineering investigation on a preliminary basis that needs to go in. And I appreciate what you're saying. I know year after year at strategic planning and so on, we discuss having shovel-ready land. And It's a great concept, and we are working towards that. For example, in the KIP area, that area structure plan is nearing completion. There's just one or two more pieces that they need to overcome and kind of issues and resolve with respect to drainage, I think, primarily. But part of the challenge, I know, in discussing that matter overall with our planning and development department is the county doesn't own outright very much land that would, has been identified in the industrial commercial land use strategy, for example, that it could put money into developing an area structure plan and then marketing those parcels, subdividing them and rezoning them or whatever appropriate so that they're ready to sell. It's, it seems that more of our equation, because again, we don't own so much developable land in that regard, is developer driven. So even the area around KIP and so on, that's, I understand it's all privately owned land. So we can do the area structure plan, we can invest that money to get it to the point where, okay, now this could be developed, but still in the end, it's that willingness and, availability of a landowner to say, okay, yes, I'm willing to go down that road and let's make it work and let's see some development. So that, it's kind of, I don't know if Hillary's still here and she could probably embellish that further, but your point is well taken, and I know it is a need and a challenge. Right now, we found out and I think we were looking at one of the maps yesterday up on the GIS, in Stewart Siding, there are 4 lots available just towards the south end there that are industrial, commercial kind of land. But again, the county doesn't own those, but there are some parcels when we have inquiries through our economic development department, we're now able to turn people towards the real estate folks who are managing those land sales. They're limited because they're not huge parcels of land, but they may well and hopefully are suitable for some smaller organizations that just need an acre or 2, for example. But again, appreciate what you're saying. These things move very slowly too, obviously. I know we've been working on the KIP piece for a good couple of years now already, and we're hopefully close to completion. But Nobleford and Picture View in particular, I think all the municipalities really have expressed an interest in kind of joint partnerships and working together. And comes back to the year in, year out conundrum of water and wastewater treatment. I think are probably the biggest challenges.
So just to follow up on that a bit, a few years ago we had a horse that kind of look at where we would sort of look in those areas to develop business parks. So is it, like, to follow up what Steve said, is it worthwhile having a revisit of that plan and kind of sitting down with the landowners there and seeing if that's something they would be interested in doing? Because we sort of have a basic model. Hillary has her hand up. Yes?
We did do some of that, but maybe Hillary can flesh that out a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That plan is only 2 years old, and we actually are using it quite a bit to move forward in terms of commercial and industrial development. I have approached landowners over the course of this year, and although they somewhat are interested, nobody tends to want to take the next step, even though we had provided them an opportunity to do a concept plan. So I find that the plan is solid, the areas are really good, and it probably would be worthwhile, like we did in the KIP area, to start maybe looking, contacting people around Picture Butte and Nobleford for those opportunities also, and then seeing how we can facilitate that, because we do have a number of lots now that are going to be coming on ready in the south part of the municipality with the Chinook Industrial Park. There's some more lots around Transmark, I think, that are going to be coming up, and then also Stewart Siding. So it might be worthwhile to set our sights more on the north side of the river to see if there's some opportunities for the Nobleford and Picture Butte areas. So that's something that Martin and I will endeavor to do. We just we've been kind of prioritizing, and we haven't gone to that part. So there might be some interest if we actually do that. Hopefully that helps the question.
Any other questions? Ken?
Yes, that would go along with the KIP Highway. If it's gonna be an industrial park there. The KIP highway should probably be made to be an all-weather road.
Yes, I think those, when we've talked about it with municipal services and doing that area structure plan, that was, I think one of the reasons why that was also being proposed is to try and facilitate that. Because we do have, there's only a few landowners there, but I do think there is some genuine interest in that KIP Colehurst area in terms of moving forward on development. So that would just help facilitate moving forward in that area.
Any other questions? Morris?
Well, just to comment, that's an interesting point that was brought up, like the potential we do have in the county. However, it's a lot of times it's not pushed too much by the county side, and we always say, well, it's strictly up to whoever wants to develop, and that does help. However, we did that joint program with the town of Picture View that time to fix that sugar factory road, and we paved it, and we were hoping that time, when we were jointly involved with that one, that we were gonna have more development on the east side of that road. And so far, there's just one business established, but the area structure plan, as this day, has never been done. And I believe the owners of the land, they never been approached yet either, and the older fellow when I have coffee with him once in a while, and he brought it up several times, are you guys still interested in developing down there? And I said, I think we are, but the thing is, just like somebody said earlier, it almost has to come from somebody, who wants to develop, but the thing is, if you have it in place, then maybe somebody is gonna come.
Pause. Just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That highway that was made there, East Butte, by the sugar factory, is that a highway that does not require any percentage, is that a full weather highway?
That is, yeah.
Okay. No, because I recall the last joint meeting that we had with Picture Butte, there was from Picture Butte side, they really wanted to start something together with the counties.
Okay.
But who's gonna, pursue it and push it, and, is it the county or? Pardon me? Why can't you hear me?
They can.
But it needs to be pushed by a developer, and if you have somebody who wants to develop there, because those people what are there with the feed mill services down there, they insist that they wanted to be there, and we almost didn't make that happen, and the reasons for that is because it was brought up from management down here, and a few county councilors that says, no, we gotta do an area structure plan down there first, and that was probably gonna take about a year to 2 years, and if that was gonna be the case, those people would have looked somewhere else. So I pushed very hard for it, hey, let's them being established down there, and then after we develop more down there, then we'll look at the area structure plan. But it still hasn't been done. But I know the landowner, they somewhat interested in getting something done there too.
Okay.
Good, Mike.
So we've had a request for a break. Should we take 10 minutes?
15?
Okay.
Okay.
I was just gonna do a quick, 30-second wrap up and then call for.
Oh, okay.
If that's okay.
That's, well.
I just wanted to say congratulations, we are at the end of the budget, so congrats, 2.5 days. Not bad, half day sooner than we thought. I did bring this slide up just to remind you where we were sitting initially when we went into the discussions at the top box there at 266 for a 1.783. I believe the one change specifically with bringing some of the tax revenue in for the market access network funds in is going to drop that to almost, basically wipe that out to zero. There are a couple of new initiatives. We have some parking lot items. The third CPO is one new initiative. The community grant program is another $100,000 initiative. A couple small ones, some additional vehicles and whatnot, but those are the two big ones that we can consider if you're looking for more reductions or increases, whatever you would have. And that's it. I just want to say a big thanks to Jen for putting this all together. Thanks for all the staff that worked on it. Thanks to Anne for her support on the whole budget document. And thanks to you for listening to us for 2.5 days. So.
Immediately following the 5-minute or 10-minute break or whatever, I'm ready to talk about the 9-4.
And then we'll revisit the parking lot items. So, yeah, thanks everybody.
So, and I do have a question that I would like to go before, well, it doesn't matter, I guess, whenever it is, but it's just on your charges for services by other departments.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll ask that before you kind of wrap up that, okay?
Is there something we can be getting?
Well, I don't know, I just wondered, because it's up about $22,000 from last year. So is that because of COLA, is that because of increased IT costs, or is it, and how do you kind of market that through the?
Is it just IT or are you talking fleet services?
Well, no, it says services by other departments.
Which page?
So, well, there's tech, utilities, assessment, finance, IT, all of them. So if you add it all up and you deduct the ones that went down, it's $22,000 up from the previous year, roughly. I didn't round it off too close.
I think there are.
So
Overall services to and from other departments went down. If you go to page 4, there's a roll-up of the entire budget there.
Page 4?
Page 4. That's a consolidated of every department. So the 4th line down on revenue, services to other departments.
Yeah.
$4.1 million went down to $4.06 million in 2019. And the same as an outgoing line on the 3rd line of expenditures. It's an in and an out because it's transferred from, it goes into fleet or into IT and then out to the other departments. So the whole thing actually went down. I guess it would depend which ones you were adding up, but.
Well, I just went by the ones we just started on today.
Okay.
And if you took out the services by other departments,
Yeah.
they don't come to anywhere close to the same numbers as on page 4.
Yeah, you have to have fleet, public works, utilities, all of the departments together, council, CAO. They all roll up to that one number. Some departments did go up. I know Larry's went up quite a bit, and that was just because of the additional staff that's been added over the years, Maddie's position, Martin's, Sarah Mitchell. Yeah, we'll work on this over break. It's gonna break and we'll come back to it when we come back, come on.
Then you're not really getting a break.
But you are.
Well,
And that's what
it was just, I didn't know because my numbers and the ones that before are totally different.
Lauren, if you go to page 211, it shows the services to other departments complete portion, which is 3.373 million. And then you add IT to that number as well to come up with just over the 4 million. And that's the total of services to and from other departments for both departments combined that you saw on that first page.
You said page 211?
Yeah, for fleet services.
Yeah.
So at the bottom half of that page, you should be seeing a breakdown of the services to other departments.
Okay.
And then 279 contains IT's breakdown.
Yeah.
And those two numbers will add up to that $4 million that I pointed out on page 4.
Okay, so where I got my numbers from was pages, the ones we just reviewed this morning.
The IT.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there were some significant changes within IT. And like we mentioned, a lot of that was due to just a big overall review. I had Doug sit down and just give me all of his inventory because at budget time, earlier on when we were doing our meetings, we were looking at things and it wasn't evenly distributed. So we needed to identify who had what areas were using what, and include some software uses and those things as well. So that's why there's so much change within IT.
But the total envelope didn't change, just the distribution of that envelope. So some departments went up, some departments went down, but the total that he needs to collect stayed, well, it actually went down in total for the year. But the envelope basically stays the same pocket, it's just how it was distributed to each department changed a little bit. Plus the airport was removed and billed as a separate line.
Does that help?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Break.
There you go.